we just want people to love aviation. I'd love it if just everybody in the world knew how to fly. And if they got it, they understood it, and they could see the world as we do as pilots.
From Earhart Innovation Series, this is What Follows with Nate Thuli.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to What Follows, the podcast where we dive into the people behind today's aviation world and meet tomorrow's innovators. I'm your host, Nate Thuli. I'm pleased to have on the show today a very special guest, Hal Bryan, who is the managing editor of the Experimental Aircraft Association, or better known as EAA. EAA is the only association that brings together the fun and camaraderie of flying, building, and restoring recreational aircraft, and one of the most passionate communities in aviation. In this episode, we explore the world of aviation through the lens of growing participation, inspiring pilots, educating people around the world, and what goes into the advocacy for aviation. Let's jump in. Hal, thanks so much for being on. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Nate. I really appreciate it, and I was glad to get the invite.
Yeah, happy to be talking to you today. Before today, I was doing some research on kind of your background, and my goodness, you've been all over the place. And I do want to get into EAA and Oshkosh and all of that, but when I see your background, I see storyteller and editor and podcaster, speaker, pilot, and very importantly, an av geek. It feels like quite the combination in an aviation career, and I'd love to understand the origin story a little bit. If you could kind of take us back, kind of how you got into aviation and the journey till now.
Absolutely. I love the origin story idea. There's no, I wasn't bombarded with gamma rays or bitten by a radioactive spider or anything. But to me, it's interesting just because I lived it. But I've been around and exposed to aviation my entire life. I'm a second generation pilot. My dad fell in love with aviation at a very early age and ended up flying for United Airlines for 37 years, from DC-3s to 747s. And that's where he met my mom. She was a stewardess, and they met on a DC-6. And yes, she was a stewardess back then, not a flight attendant yet. So they got married. But aviation was just around. Most of my favorite toys as a kid were flying toys or Corgi and Dinky die-cast airplane models, all those kinds of things. When I was about 4 years old, Dad bought an airplane, a 1944 Cessna T-50, which is a lesser-known twin. Looks like a little baby DC-3, and
Very
that was
cool.
That was the family airplane for many, many years. So starting when I was 4 years old, he'd put a couple of phone books in the right seat and had me climb up on that. And I still couldn't see over the instrument panel. So he just pointed at the attitude indicator and said, "Hey, keep these lines straight."
Oh my gosh.
And that airplane's being restored right now, but I have that original attitude indicator at home. So that's the thing that, the first thing I stared at when I started flying. But
oh my gosh, no kidding. What a tribute. The T-50 you said. So is that I'm trying to picture that twin engine. Is that similar to the Beech 18? I think that's like
it's often mistaken for a Beech 18. It's a bit smaller and a single tail, colloquially known as the bamboo bomber.
Okay.
If there's EAA members out there listening to this as we are recording it, I'm not sure when this is going to air, but our April issue is coming up soon, and there's going to be one on the cover. Coincidentally, I wrote a story about it, so you're going to see what that looks like.
Incredible.
Older listeners will know it as one of Sky King's first airplane before he started flying the 310 in his TV series. But anyway, you have to be even older than me to get that. But anyway, aviation was always around. It was always, in the cards for me, and started flying as a teenager and got my private at 18 and my instrument right after that. And, did a few other careers, was in law enforcement for quite a while. Then I found my way over to Microsoft, and I was at Microsoft for 15 years in a very techie role. But after about 4 years there, I was able to move over into the flight simulator group. So I was working on flight sim software, and so being a geek, being a pilot, and having a great time with it. And while I'm not a commercial pilot, I've never, I guess you could say I've never flown an airplane, commercially, professionally, but aviation for, the last more than 30 years has been somehow attached to my career. I've been involved in it.
Right. So, I mean, professional aviation, if not commercial, in one degree or another.
Right.
And when you're saying at Microsoft, are you talking about the simulator that was still at Microsoft Flight Simulator that we all know?
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked on that right at on a couple of the post-release patches, starting from Flight Simulator 98 up through the very end when they closed down the studio and everything after Flight Simulator X. And that was shut down in 2009. And then, of course, they brought it back in 2020. And I was already well established at EAA at that point. But I did some friendly, very, very unofficial consulting on the new one when that came out. And so I'm proud to say that my name is in the credits of the 2020 release as a special thanks kind of thing.
That's
but
incredible.
Yeah, you never get too far away from it.
Yeah, and my goodness, I mean, I don't think you're going to find many pilots that haven't had, one sort of relationship with the flight simulator side of things or another. I know
Right.
I lived on Flight Simulator 98, and then there are a couple that followed after that. That was back when my childhood friend and I would take off. I grew up outside of Chicago, and we would fly into what was
Perfect.
previously Meigs Field.
Yes.
And in 98, it was still there,
Yep. In real life and in the sim. And
exactly.
remember
Yeah.
that very vividly in, was it Flight Sim 2002, which we call FS8? Because when was it bulldozed? It was right around that time, because I believe it was post 9/11. But anyway, forgive me if, memory fades a little bit.
What a journey. And then now fast forwarding into today, here, obviously, you've been a part of EAA for better part of 16, 17 years at this point, right? Just about anyone in the aviation world is quite aware of EAA. It's an entity, it's a name that's quite synonymous with aviation on both the GA and commercial front. But would love to hear kind of in your words how you would define the mission, what EAA is here to do. And, and especially in this dynamic where, you see kind of this surge in the ebbs and flows of innovation on both the GA and the commercial side of the house, and kind of how the mission of EAA sort of flows into that, and the role that community plays.
Sure. But great question. And so I know you asked it in my own words, but I'll start with the official words, the official language, and then tell you how I interpret that. And that is our official mission statement of the EAA is to grow participation in aviation by sharing the spirit of aviation. I come to work every day, and as we're applying that, I boil it down even simpler. It's just, I want more people to fly, and I want more people to fly because they love it. Certainly we have, so much of our outreach and the things we do for young people leads to careers as professional pilots, and we love that and we cheer them on. But, that's not our overarching goal for everybody. We just want people to love aviation. I'd love it if just everybody in the world knew how to fly. And if they got it, they understood it, and they could see the world as we do as pilots. And, branching out from that, then we're always looking at how do we inspire people? How do we encourage them? How do we educate them? And of course, on the legal side of things with our department that has offices in Washington, how do we advocate for that and preserve the freedoms that we already have and continue expanding and changing things? So one of the biggest elements of that is focusing on removing barriers and figuring out how do you make aviation accessible. And most people know that EAA started 73 years ago now, focused first and foremost on supporting people who wanted to build their own airplanes and finding a legal and safe and free way to do that. And that was something that had, you said, ebbs and flows, and that was very much the case in the 20s and 30s. We had a lot of that happening. By the time you got to the 50s, you had a lot of different regulations and a lot of things that said, well, you can, but we don't know how to legally allow it, all these sorts of things. So that was our foothold, was getting people together who wanted to build their own airplanes. And then that very quickly, within the first couple of years, grew into people restoring older airplanes. And then we go into people restoring warbirds. And so by the time you hit about 1970 or so, we're very well established as kind of a hub of all aspects of recreational aviation, whether you're building, restoring, doing aerobatic competitions, you're into classic civilian aircraft, you're into vintage warbirds, all those things. The tent just got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Wow. Yeah, it's something in your narrative that struck a chord with me. I actually wasn't prepared for when you talk about the restoration of that and the inspiration that comes with that. As a side hobby, I restore Land Rover Defenders, just a kind of a
Really?
neat type of car.
No kidding. We've got a not to go off the rails. We've got a '93 long wheelbase Range Rover that
No kidding.
is sort of awaiting its turn in restoration, and I always daydream of a nice like Series 2, Series 2A to restore as well. So a big Land Rover fan here.
No
But we'll
kidding.
have to
That's
talk more
incredible.
about that when we're not boring everybody that's listening for airplane stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hey, we're supposed to be talking about planes, and now we went down Land Rover Avenue. But yeah, and the funny thing about it though is the parallels. There are two that keep weaving in together. So at Earhart we're trying to modernize flying in kind of our own way with avionics and flight controls and an aircraft as well. And what I find so fascinating is when you dig into a plane, even a newer one, how much of that starts to look like how something as simple as a Land Rover is put together.
Absolutely.
The construction type and the method for how you restore that, you take that back. But that parallel aside, when you talk about inspiring and educating, and I got to say, the advocacy is monumental because it there is a lot of passion, a lot of opportunity in aviation, but there can be a lot of pressure and opposition to it, from a safety or regulatory perspective. And so having that is incredible. But in the parallel with this, so this Land Rover hobby, I have two daughters, and when they look at what goes into these vehicles, and they look at, kind of, hey, we're going to get in the Land Rover today, and we're going to go drive that over to the beach or go take that out for a hike, you do see that kind of spark of, hey, there's something kind of alive about this relationship with driving a vehicle and operating with that, especially with younger folks, like with my daughters, having that connection to what we're doing, having that connection to, kind of what goes into it does seem to light that, which I love how, the inspiration and the education is part of, the EAA, story, and that, it starts young. I think anyone that's flying probably has some kind of origin story of, hey, I remember when that bug kind of first bit me, and it's a calling in some ways, So I don't know, it's very cool to see.
And I'll second your comments about the parallels here, whether it's restoring old cars. We've had some other older British cars and things, whether it's cars, it's airplanes, it's whatever. There's even a group right now, and I always remember the name of what they're building until I'm called upon to say it. I feel bad about that, so we could look it up. But there's a group that's actually basically building from new an unbuilt, like last generation steam locomotive from the late 50s. So there's like a whole line of these things. I'm not a huge train guy. I have a deep appreciation for them. I know nothing about them. But as a friend once said, a lot of us are just born with the transportation gene. So for me, it's airplanes, but old cars, obviously way up there. Trains are intriguing. Ocean liners are a big love of mine, all this kind of stuff. And so this group that's doing this locomotive, it's like I'm reading about it, and it's like, okay, we could go and talk to them. And when we say, restoring our B-17 is a big, complicated task, they're a group that would understand that immediately and viscerally and firsthand. And a lot of people, you don't necessarily grasp the complexity of it, the enormity of it, and the rewards of it until you've been hands-on yourself.
Yes, absolutely. And then the part of being hands-on with it too is almost this more fundamental connection to what it is that then you're operating,
Right.
and and anytime you're either driving a restored thing or you're flying maybe a more conventional aircraft, your body's senses go beyond just, what's coming off the pitot-static system or what's coming in through your ear and eye, and that you feel a shutter, you feel something and like, wow, something came through my hands as opposed to my feet, or came in through the seat I'm sitting on, and that language is speaking to you, and what I find so incredible about having that connection is that, it does kind of help you sort of fundamentally wrap your head around what it is that you're operating, which seems beneficial, especially in something like aviation where there's a lot of coordination that goes into it. It's not just procedure. You're moving through three-dimensional space, and unlike in a car, more of those axes of movement are available.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's another thing that has always struck me. So I'm an odd sort of walking dichotomy. I'm of a generation that is supposed to be sort of getting to be a little bit curmudgeonly and a little bit of get off my lawn, but I'm still very much a techie, and I'm still very much an early adopter. But my happiest flying, when I'm flying just for fun, not talking about when I want to go places, is in something, the older the better. And I've got a lot of time in de Havilland Tiger Moths. In fact, I'm buying into one in Canada right now. So this is a 85-year-old airplane used in World War II as a trainer up in Canada. And, so it was really resonating to me what you were saying about the sensations and the connections and things. And the other layer for me, of course, is the history of it, and the idea that, yes, I can get in a Tiger Moth and I can strap an iPad to my kneeboard and, I can have those advantages. But in terms of the stick and rudder skills, just because it's 2026 and not 1941, it doesn't mean that it's magically easier for me.
Right.
And in fact, for some people now, if they'd never flown a tail dragger, it's actually considerably more difficult to move into that sort of thing. So and that's not an elitist thing. It's just the sense that, I'm moving the stick and the rudder and the throttle in these ways, and I'm hearing this in the wires, and I see this sight picture framed by the two yellow wings. That's the same as it was for somebody doing something or preparing to do something very monumental and very important, 75, 80, 85 years ago.
Right. And you're hitting upon something that it's actually a topic that here on the team we've been talking about a lot lately is, competency. What it means to be a competent pilot as the world of aviation continues to modernize, and we look to the automotive industry a fair amount for that because, there's obviously been incredible advancements in the infusion of technology in both the auto and aviation worlds. In some ways, the self-flying aspects of it have actually predated automotive. Autopilot has been around for quite a long time and really quite profoundly capable. But in the automotive industry, the last few years, especially with self-drive and even more passive things like lane keep assist and adaptive cruise control and all the sensors and all the backup information and everything. And so it kind of, it puts forward this conversation of what it means to be a highly competent operator of a vehicle in 2026 and 2027 fundamentally means, one, developing a competency and a comfort with a use of tech that wasn't the case before.
Right.
So, go back 20 years ago, you could be an incredibly competent driver and have no idea how adaptive cruise control works or what a lane keep assist nudge feels like or how the backup lines on the backup camera work. Interestingly, there's also sort of this somewhat of an obsolescence to some of these skills in today's day and age. You can also be a very competent, again, driver of a vehicle and not know how to parallel park on a hill, a manual transmission without any sensors, right? Like these are, it's sort of this clash of worlds. And what's fascinating about flying, these older aircraft as well is you're having to span that whole gap, right? You're having to, embrace the technology that has made aviation safer and more accessible. And you talk about, hey, the iPad, I'm sure there's some sort of flight navigation going on in there and flight planning, right?
Yeah.
But then outside of that, you're still having to go back into the skill set and demonstrate competency in skills that some pilots today operating more modern aircraft don't even need those skills, and it's kind of a clash of worlds in an interesting way.
Yeah, It really is. It's intriguing that you brought up the idea that, in some of these areas, because we tend to look at general aviation, we tend to look at outside of the experimental world, which is a whole different, sort of different aspect. But in, the certified world, we also sort of look at it and say, boy, it just takes so long for something new to come along and so long for things to get certified, and it's so complex and everything else. But you made an excellent point. You talked about things like autopilots and some of those other things actually coming to aviation long before we saw them in cars, even though, we look at cars have been running, engines on unleaded fuel for a long, long time. And, we're now, working mightily to try to get to that same point in aviation. And I think I'm of that, I mentioned I'm kind of a dichotomy, because I am somebody who will always believe that the raw stick and rudder skills, so to speak, at least, are vital. And, even though, I said I was an early adopter, and I was flying, with a Windows-based PDA running a piece of software called the Anywhere Map 25 years ago. So well before iPhones and iPads. There's no smartphones yet, none of that stuff. I had
you kind of put a time capsule on that by even referring to it as a PDA.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they were back then. And so there I was, Mr. Early Adopter flying around. But there was one, and boy, it's a godsend. Magenta Line is pure magic. But number one, even now, I still have a sectional with me with the lines on it, just in case. Because there was one flight in my life, even when everybody in cars was starting to switch to or transition to relying on GPS. Well, I was flying outside of Seattle, and there was a solar flare, and there was a GPS outage for about 2.5 hours. Now,
2.5 hours.
Yeah. Now,
okay.
The odds of that ever happening again, the odds of me being in the right place at the right time, I mean, it's infinitesimally small. But it happened once. And if I didn't know where I was, I didn't have a chart, or I didn't know how to tune a VOR. If you really want to make me sound old, the airplane I was flying at the time actually had a Loran in it. But I never even learned how to use it because it was out of date by the time I started.
My gosh.
But anyway, the point being that, it'll always be about sort of bets and things. And, even though you look at some of the rules right now and you sort of scratch your head and say, boy, do we need to still do this as in flight instruction? And ground schools, do we need to teach student pilots to use a metal slide rule that's 90 years old, the E6B? But it's still usually part of the curriculum. You kind of scratch your head at that. If it were up to me, I don't know that I would still teach that, but I'm still going to show people a paper chart. And it doesn't really, there's no real resource penalty to bringing that along. So
no,
it's all about that. It's all about that balance.
Yeah, and this dichotomy that you're talking about, I refer to we're a bit of a kindred spirit on that one. I refer to the similar mindset a fair amount with a lot of funness. And actually, I kind of refer to it too. I might also be a bit of a glutton for punishment, because who would voluntarily daily drive a vintage vehicle when, there are perfectly comfortable cars that can do really everything better. But, it's what's fascinating about it, though, is Back when I was at the Air Force Academy as a student, like many students there, I was in the glider program. I had my PPL already, so I transitioned to be one of the glider instructor pilots. And what I love about flying a glider, and even having a powered flight license and the ability to operate higher performing aircraft, you get into a glider and it's a stick. It's a rudder. It's a basic 6-pack. You've got some spoilers, and then taped to the outside is a literal piece of string.
Yes.
And
the most valuable instrument you've got, right? Is the yaw string.
It really is, right? And because it draws a fundamental line of, you can have the right instrument scan and you can have the right use of the tech, but at the end of the day, you are making a machine go through this fluid thing called air. And if you can kind of wrap your head around not only one of just, okay, can we pause for a second? That's amazing. The fact that these things can even fly is just the most incredible thing. But then when you kind of wrap your head around some of these fundamentals of, sort of what the stick and rudder, what the old, kind of hands-on relationship with that aircraft communicates to you. To me, anyway, you feel more connected to what's actually going on in the air. And then, a coordinated turn intuitively makes more sense, or energy management in a climb or a descent just intuitively sinks in maybe a little deeper. And then of course from a safety perspective, the part that is sort of the elephant in the room too is that unlike flight simulator, or unlike your modern car when you're driving down the road, you can't hit pause, you can't pull over to the side of the road.
Exactly.
Right. And so you're moving, and sometimes in that dynamic movement, you got to revert back to skills that maybe aren't as necessary in a more normal, non-edge case kind of flight, right?
Right. No, you're absolutely right. We are in violent agreement because, and you talk about that idea of things being intuitive, and you said something really important when you talked about just a greater understanding of things. And it's like, I remember that so vividly in my flight training, these periods when you start to learn something new and you're just sort of, repeating the tasks and going through the motions the instructor showed you. And then there's those light bulb moments when it clicks. It's like, oh, now I understand why. Now I can feel why I need to do this or why that's happening and things. And to me, when we talk about the technology aspects of it and these layers of things that bring us so much more information and make us safer and make everything so much easier, I'm a huge proponent of it and a fan, but I see the value. And if there's any, if I'm talking to younger pilots and they're willing to listen to some advice from me, I think the more that they appreciate what the technology is doing and the struggles that it's alleviating, then the better pilots they're going to be and the better equipped they are going to be. If something, there's a lot of debates online, and it's like, I'm a student pilot, what kind of iPad should I get? And then all the people my age jump on, don't buy an iPad, and don't even touch that thing until you got your private and 6,000 hours and everything else. And that's not me, but I'm somewhere broadly in the middle of that. In that, I think there's a lot of value in learning the fundamentals and then laying these other things on top of it, because you never know when you're going to have to fall back on those fundamentals.
Right, exactly. And I love how you mentioned this understanding of what's going on. A story came to mind. I've got an older brother who is a pilot as well. For a while, he was flying C-7 for the Air Force, and he's a Air squadron commander now at this point. And Zach, if you're listening, I apologize. I'm about to throw you under the bus a little bit, but I learned how to fly way back in high school. He was not yet thinking about flying, and I took him up flying for the first time. And hey, let's go flying. I've got this new skill I have. And so I took him up flying and let him grab the controls for a little bit, do a couple of turns here and there. And it was the first time I ever experienced something that, anyone that has ever led a non-pilot, you just kind of, do a couple turns here and there and sort of wrap their head around what's going on in the plane can relate to. We were in just a little bit of a turn, and, just kind of in this little bit of I think it was, a turn, 5-10 degree bank, subtle. And I made the comment, okay, go ahead and level out here. And so he brought it was a Cessna, so he brought the yoke to level, and the plane kept going, obviously, right? It continued that turn. And he's like, wait, what's happening? And like, well, no, you have to turn it, back beyond level, right? To right the wings. And then you have to undo the moment you put in place to get to there, right? And so you have to look at what energy is flowing in a certain way, and you have to undo it a couple different ways. And then you have to kind of unpack the movement and get back to level. And from the time I was 4 years old, I was absolutely obsessed with aviation. Any piece of paper I could get my hands on, I folded it and I flew it. Any type of wood I could find, I put wings on it and I flew it, anytime. And that was not something that I had ever even, it just fundamentally never disconnected of like, well, of course I have to bank the other way and level it. And it's a vivid example in my mind of, this kind of understanding of what am I commanding? When I turn the yoke or move the stick, what series of events are happening, and how does that translate to what actually changes in the plane? And that's not necessarily intuitive. And often if we put too much tech in between pilot command and what's going on with the aircraft, we don't necessarily form the full pathway to connect that, right? And we might not fully grasp what that relationship is in the end, which seems kind of alarming.
It's a terrific example too, because you put somebody in an airplane cockpit, in a 172 and things like this. And it's, if they've never done this, if they've had no exposure and they haven't, just been in love with it and played flight sims and built models and done all those things, the closest analog they're going to have is a car. And so, of course, they're going to think, when I turn the quote unquote steering wheel, I hold it. And then when I'm done turning, I put it back to the middle. And that's how steering wheels work. And it's so easy. You and I don't think ever had that disconnect. As you said, I think we're of a mind there, but fascinating for your brother that he would experience that. And, in his defense, his reaction is the more logical one.
Right, exactly, right.
The weirdos like us who say, well, of course it makes sense because that's just what airplanes do, because we've been gawking at them our entire lives.
Yeah. And what really stands out about that example is, in that particular example, my brother went on to have a career as a professional pilot. He's an incredibly capable pilot, commanding large aircraft in challenging scenarios. And so he developed an incredible competency, but it's just sort of, some things aren't necessarily intuitive. And so that point of entry is said another way, that's where we get into this accessibility piece, right? And when you were talking about, kind of, hey, how do we grow participation in aviation, right? By sharing the spirit of aviation, you are really, you didn't use the word accessibility in that specific statement, but it's there, right? It's how do we make it accessible? How do we, that first point of, I don't even want to say exposure, because you can be exposed to it and still not be in it, but that first step into it and that threshold, certainly in your time, on the simulator front, but then also, at EAA and just growing up around aviation forever, what are your thoughts on how we make that more accessible? What are some things we could be doing in a way that isn't necessarily, I don't know, it can be so overwhelming, right? To try to enter aviation, especially if it's not something that's been kind of in your blood. And so what do we do?
Well, and I always find that question fascinating because I've never known a moment of conscious life without aviation just being there. And I'm especially fascinated when I meet people, meet friends who came into it with no connection at all whatsoever. Great friend of mine, a new colleague, and Grace, find her on social as the Northern Aviator. There's my token plug for her.
There we go.
She started learning to fly as a teenager, and she lived on Mackinac Island in Michigan. And there's an airport there, but there's other than ambulance and a couple of fire trucks, and maybe a police car, there's no cars allowed. It's it's a very touristy spot. And when she was learning to fly, she had to ride her bike to the airport, and there's no airplane space there either. So she'd ride her bike to the airport, and then her instructor would fly, 0.2 on the hobs from the mainland, pick her up the end of the runway, and then they'd go fly, and then he'd drop her off, and then he'd go back, and she's still paying for it. And look at somebody like that who caught the spark and then just was going to do whatever it took. And, when I was her age, God, I'm old. Sorry. But I was.
It's just a mindset.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. I was living on a private airstrip. I mean, every morning I wake up, open the curtains, I'm looking at a runway and airplanes taking off and landing. So I couldn't.
Yeah, so how is it not part of your life?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Couldn't have had it easier. Circling back to your question, when we talk about accessibility, like for me, the first step of making it more accessible is you've got to show people what it is. You got to show people that it's possible. Because there's so many people who think, number one, when they think aviation, they think I'm standing in line in TSA and I'm, getting on an A320 and going from here to Fort Lauderdale or something. Mm-hmm. And that, yes, that's aviation, and it's vital, and it's a marvel of innovation and technology, but it doesn't occur to them that this is something that they could do and they could just do for fun. And you start showing the things, and, hey, when you're in a turn, you gotta turn the wheel the other way to stop. That's amazing. Right. We can just get in an airplane and go from here to 3 other states. We don't really need anybody's permission, depending on the airspace and things like that. We can just go, and we can go straight from here to there. We don't have to follow the roads. We don't have to pay tolls and do all these things. And some of that is somewhat unique to the U.S., with other countries getting more draconian. But for me, that's always been step one. Is number one, this is a thing that you can actually do. And, of course, for EAA, our flagship outreach program is our Young Eagles program. And that's the intent there, is to give, as many young people as we can, that first free flight, get them up in the air, let them take the controls if they want, show them that it's possible, show them that it's fun, show them, just this unparalleled world of opportunities that are out there, and get them excited about it. And as we're recording this in the early spring of 2026, we are marching toward, after 34 years of the program, very close to having flown 2.5 million kids in that program.
Oh my gosh.
Since the beginning.
2.5 million.
2.5 million. And
wow.
The original goal when the program was kicked off was to fly 1 million kids by 2003, which was the 100th anniversary of the rights and that centennial of aviation. And we met that goal, and just, still going strong. And it's an incredibly rewarding program. So if there's anybody out there that's interested and hasn't done it, I couldn't encourage you more strongly to do it. But it's, not every young eagle that you fly is going to go off and become a pilot. And, by any stretch of the imagination, knock on wood, I've flown many dozens. I've never had one that didn't have an incredible time. Like, it wasn't just over the moon with enthusiasm and loving it. And I think even the ones that maybe they never get in an airplane again, but they've got a different opinion of aviation. They're not going to roll their eyes when an airplane flies over and look, another rich guy with his toys, or that's so noisy. Why do we let them do that? They're not going to have that attitude. So that's that biggest first step. And then, of course, from there, it's engaging their interest, keeping them interested, and providing resources and knocking down barriers and all the other catchphrases. But we are, actively, I don't want to say experimenting. I mean, it's right there in our name, Experimental Aircraft Association. We're, always trying new things and always working that problem in as many different ways as we can every single day. We certainly have our share of successes, but we've, never feel like that we can do anything other than just keep trying harder and harder and harder.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, so first of all, massive congratulations to everyone that's been behind the Young Eagles to getting it to 2.5 million. That's monumental. And that more than just moves the needle, that's a real number
Right.
of folks, and at a young age, right, where you can light that spark and everything. That's incredible. When you were sharing that just now, it reminded me of a young Nate story as well. It was I was a newly minted PPL. I had a brand new driver's license and a brand new pilot's license that summer, and pumping gas at the airport, trying to pay for, well, both, because both of those hobbies burn a lot of gas.
Right.
And I got a call from the college administrator who was behind the flight program there. And he's like, "Hey, Thuli, you still at the airport?" And I'm like, "Yeah, Bruce, I'm closing up. I'm cleaning up, but I'm still here." He's like, "Hey, stay there. I'll be there in a little bit." And then he hung up. No idea what the call was about. And a little bit of time goes by, and I see, this was around sunset, kind of pretty cinematic lighting at the time, but I see this old Piper Super Cub touchdown. He comes off the runway as an uncontrolled airport, comes off the runway, plops open the side door, leather bomber jacket on, the cool hat, and he coming over and kills the engine and whips the tail around. He's like, "Hey, get in here." Like, yeah, of course, I'm hopping in. Of course I am, right? And hop in the plane and he fires it up. We go take off, and we just do a lap around the local area. It was maybe 0.2, 0.3 kind of a flight. Nothing all that big, but we're flying a little bit, and he's like, "Hey, that's my house. That's where I live. We're going to land in the backyard." He had his own kind of grass strip back there, and touched down, and then got back up and flew over. And in this area, in this part of the Midwest, there's a big corn maze. And he's like, "Hey, you want to see the corn maze this year?" And there it was. There's the pattern, and I was kind of mentally like, so that's how you get out of there. Now I know.
Exactly. That's a whole separate business right there, is corn maze cheating.
Exactly. Yeah. And I guess thankfully for the corn maze, this was before people had smartphones. So I didn't get to snap a photo, but there's the answer key. Anyway, and that was it. And came back and landed. And he's like, I just wanted to show you why you're working so hard to learn how to fly, right? I just want to show you what this world is. And it was less than an hour of his time, but that moment changed my life at yet another, and it was already in my blood, but that just lit the spark even more. And that speaks to the inspiration of accessibility, that speaks to the community of accessibility, right? And making aviation more approachable. It's about the people, right? And I'm sure over your journey with aviation, you've seen that community, you've seen that aspect in a number of ways as well.
Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. Under the EAA banner, we have one of our other sort of secret ingredients that helps us, do succeed as much as we do, is our network of chapters. We've got somewhere around 900 chapters, largely in the U.S. We've got quite a few in Canada. We've got several around the world as well. And those are groups of people who, since very early on in the organization's history, groups said that, hey, we like this, but we're not near your headquarters in Wisconsin or, wherever we were based at the time. But we like this sense of community, and we want to get together more than just once a year near the headquarters. And how do we take what we get out of those trips and have it locally and get together every month or whatever and do these other activities? So our chapter network is a fantastic way for people to sort of step into a community. It's one thing to just sort of go out to your local GA airport. If you don't know what you're doing, you don't know anything about it, you show up and there's a fence and you're not even sure you're supposed to be there. And, you hope and pray in those situations, if there is somebody peeking through the fence, somebody on the inside sees it and takes action right away, welcomes them into it. But we know that's not always the case. However, if there is an EAA chapter at that airport or some other kind of organization or club, it can be a way to start and say, okay, there's already a community here. There's a bunch of people that are going to take me under their wing, pun intended, and sort of show me the ropes. And again, you start pursuing that accessibility piece and start showing you what's possible. And our chapter network is fantastic. They're a wonderful group of mentors as well that will follow people through their aviation journeys.
Wow, that's a great, and we see mentors as value added just in all aspects of life, right? You see coaches and mentors and counselors, and of course we need that in aviation, right? I mean, it's complicated. It's can be quite daunting to figure out how to navigate all of that, and especially if you haven't had the opportunity to grow up exposed to it. And that's incredible. And the accessibility of that is really value added for that. On that front, EAA, coming up later this year, you have a small gathering of people getting together.
Yes.
In Oshkosh. Here at Earhart, we're feverishly working to make sure our own booth and presence is ready to go. But jokes aside, I mean, this has become something quite mythical in aviation globally.
It has,
and this is truly a landmark thing. I think I see, just record-setting numbers every year, even. But outside of that, you look at the age span of people that attend, and the amount of new aviation capability that gets unveiled around events like this, and just the demonstrations and the connection and all of that. As someone who's really a part of that on the inside, what is that to you? What is AirVenture to you?
Wow. You didn't tell me there was going to be an impossible question.
Sorry, I didn't mean to hijack.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's a terrific question. It is, as you could tell, it's not an easy one to answer. It's something that it's our annual membership convention. And, so I've been to, before it was called AirVenture, before it had that sort of that trademarkable name associated to it. It was just Oshkosh or the Fly-In or whatever. This coming one, I believe, is going to be number 27 for me total. And that was one visit just as an attendee, flying out from the Seattle area in a then 50-year-old airplane with my dad, and taking 3 days each way to get there. And it was it was a pilgrimage, and it absolutely floored me. And then I moved over to Microsoft, and it became part of my job to come out again as you were doing this summer, coming out as an exhibitor and doing those things. But I can tell you and this is an area I don't mind speaking for every one of my colleagues, being part of a team, and I say everybody's got a piece of it. That's not true. Everybody's got about 12 pieces of it. We all wear a lot of different hats that week. There is the first one word answer to your question, what is it to me? And that is, it is a privilege. It is a profound privilege to be part of the group that has a piece in making it happen for everybody. I have every year I run into people who are so moved to be here, and they're just happy. That's their happy time. And so what if we're doing 14, 16-hour days for 2.5, 3 weeks nonstop, whatever. My mantra at that point is I'll sleep in August. But when you see how much it means to people, and whether it's every year I seem to find an equal number of people who are coming for the first time, and maybe this is truly a bucket list thing for them, because it's a commitment. It's a challenge. It's not something you sort of wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to stop by Oshkosh for the fly-in for a little while. You've got a plan, and people come from all the world. So every year I meet some people who are the first timers, and they're moved to tears by it. And then I meet the people who have been coming every year since 1970, when it moved to Oshkosh, or even longer, when it was in Rockford, Illinois, or earlier. And those are the people who say, I simply wouldn't miss it no matter what. Just under any circumstances, it's that important to me. And when you realize what the event means, and it's so big, it's so sprawling, 700,000 people and 1,600 acres of aviation, everything. And everybody has their own traditions. Everybody has their own favorite spots, and everybody has the area that this is what's important to me. But you can't help but just be happy and soak up that infectious passion that people have. And it's, people call it Shangri-La. People, it's easy to get very romantic about it. This city that sort of arises and then fades away. And obviously we are about so much more than just that one week as an organization, but that week is unparalleled. And we have often said, it's like when you look at how the event and how the organization has grown over the last 73 years, we have been asked by people in other countries, have come to us and said, okay, we want to do this. We would like to copy this and have you run one in our country. And you just shake your head and laugh, because it's like, okay, well, step one, we need 4 generations of volunteers, 70 years of sometimes chaotic and creative and thoughtful and again, that word, experimental growth. Let's try this, let's try that. And this, unbeatable DIY spirit and all these things. I have no idea how you would just set out with a clear-cut plan and build anything close to this from scratch. I think it has to have grown organically because people love it and they want it to happen. And of course, we would be completely dead in the water without an army of volunteers.
Truly a monumental annual event that, it actually reminded me, I read a book actually a number of years ago, author Eric Weiner. He has a couple of kind of geographically based books, one about happiness and bliss, but another one about the geography of genius. And in this book, he's exploring this idea of, why do the Silicon Valleys of the world happen? These pockets of just extraordinary things. And as you're talking about, AirVenture and just the origin, going back in the archives on what, sort of this annual membership convention has become, there is something magical about that, right? You can't, as you're describing, you can't just plunk that down anywhere. It's the culmination of so many things coming together that there's no recipe, there's no playbook. it is what it is. It is what it has become, and I'm sure we're going to see yet again record-setting numbers this year as more and more of the world just embraces this, which is just incredible. So for anyone heading to Oshkosh this year, a tip from the inside, is there any tip that you would give, something that still gives you a wow factor besides, hey, I got a plug, swing by the Earhart tent, check out what we're doing. But outside of that, any parting advice for folks?
So if you're a first timer, the first thing I'm going to tell you is you understand you cannot see everything. And you will set yourself up for some degree of disappointment if you think you can and then you try and you fail. You have to have sort of a Zen approach to it and understand that you're going to see as much as you can, but nobody's ever seen it all. And that's whether you're here for a day or you come 2 days early and stay 10 days, whatever that is. So try to make some peace with that up front. And then, figure out the things that you really, really want to see and make a bit of a plan. But the wow factor for me comes from, and again, trying to put kind of an attendee hat on. The biggest wow factor for me comes from just going with the flow. Don't get too obsessed with an itinerary and a plan. I mean, certainly note the things you don't want to miss, but I don't know how much sense this is going to make. This is certainly not practical advice necessarily, but I've got a wonderful network of very, very dear friends, most of whom I really only see once a year during that week, unless I'm traveling throughout the rest of the year. And I have found that the worst thing I can try to do is set up a time and date to meet up with them and make these plans, because then everything gets complicated and stressed and you're in a hurry and I've got to get over here. This is going to sound silly and kind of ethereal, but I have found if I just relax and I just trust that everything's going to work out, I bump into everybody every year, one time or another, and you just stay, so just, I'm not trying to be too froofy, too new age or something about it. But it's just relax a bit, sort of go with the flow and trust that you're going to have one experience after another. And I guess the other tip that I would have, I mean, there's a long list of things about comfortable shoes and sunscreen and staying hydrated, all that good stuff. That's typical stuff. But the other thing that I would have is just don't be shy. Strike up a conversation, because the person in line for the porta potty or the bratwurst or whatever in front of you or behind you, I will guarantee you they have a story to tell. And it's amazing. You see this in aviation, and I know you see it in the Land Rover, the Defender world. I've seen it in the car world and elsewhere. I see it more in aviation than in any other sort of quote unquote niche community I've ever been involved in. If you have made the effort to come to Oshkosh and you're here and you're walking around the grounds, everybody else has made that effort too. And you're both here because you're passionate about aviation. So whether you know it or not, just about everybody you see is already a friend of yours at And so, start those conversations, and you never know who you're going to talk to. Maybe it's somebody who just soloed a 150, or it might be, a record-setting astronaut or test pilot. You just have no idea, but you're all there for the same reason, and you're all there because you want to be there, and you're all happy to be there. And it's just let that atmosphere, just let it carry you through the week or through the day or whatever time you spend.
That's incredible. An inspiring line I picked up from my grandfather over the years was, you got to talk to people.
Yes.
And what you'll find is there's common ground with pretty much anyone. And especially when you're at a gathering like this, I don't think you even have to dig that far to find it, which what a magical thing to participate in. And really appreciate it. Hal, this has been incredible. I really appreciate your stories, your insight, and even more so, I appreciate what you're doing to help modernize and make accessible and make exciting and just grow this incredible thing called aviation. You're a titan in this industry, and it's just been a privilege spending the time chatting with you. So thank you truly very much for the time.
Well, you flatter me far too much, Nate, but I do appreciate it. And I always enjoy talking about this stuff, and I think that's patently obvious at this point. So really appreciate the invitation, and thanks for the chance to come on and talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we do here.
It's been an honor. Thanks so much.